Blessing us with the word. Thank you.
All the efforts I can and we're grateful to be here together assembled in our council meeting, and grateful that we might be able to study the different points that are presented on our agenda and able to make proper decisions. Pray that we might be able to listen carefully to what is said and be able to comprehend it. And we pray, Father, for all those who are suffering from fire and smoke, that Thou might intervene by allowing us some rain. And we pray, Father, for these things. Only in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right. So yes, we'll call the meeting to order and move right to the adoption of our agenda today. Are there any additions need to be considered? If not, I'm looking for a motion to adopt. Yes.
Adopt the agenda of this meeting.
All those in favor? Thank you. So we'll move right into our delegation. We've got Mr. Atkins here to report on the progress of his project and some of that remediation work that he's doing. So, Lorca, are you ready? We'll turn the time over to you, sir. I think there's a microphone on that podium, so we should hear you fine.
Thank you. Thank you for seeing me today. Before I get started, though, I wanted to particularly thank this council. Another month or so, and some of you may be free as a bird. And
actually, many of us are going to be.
So I just wanted to thank you for the help that you have given me. In your absence, I'll keep working on that electrical cost recovery. But I thank you for all the help that you've given me, and as you can see from what's going on down there, we're going to be paving this week, and the pathway will be finished, and we're getting really close. So it's been a long time, but we're getting there.
Wonderful.
Okay, the two items that I wanted to bring to your attention was, first of all, with respect to a floodplain study. I know that Cardston is in the furthest corner of the province, and we don't get much attention. We know that after the 2013 flood, that everybody's thinking dramatically changed, even the governments. And with the $5 billion that they've been spending, as you know, most of that money has been spent on political rationale. In other words, let's make everyone comfortable that lost something. But let's not take responsibility, and let's not do any prevention, and let's not do any enhancement. And at the same time, Southern Alberta, as you know, was granted about $25 million, and how that was distributed, again, I think we got shortchanged. In addition to all of that, the thing that I wanted to mention, and that is that it not only affects me, and it affects the golf course, but profoundly affects the town. The floodplain study that was done by Stanley and Associates was done in 1992. And as you know, the floodplain study, that is floodways and floodplains, are simply a matter of the topographic elevation. And the criteria that was used for that 1992, now 25 years old, simply, it may have been too close to on the heels of the dredging, the bridge loss, and some of the other things that happened that changed the course of the creek. And then the 2010 mark that we'll talk about a little bit later, which really changed the channel. In any case, you may be aware that 64, 95, 2010, 2013, and 2014 all were 100-year events. Now, 64 was 323 cubic meters per second. 95 was 303. 2010, 2013 was actually 383 cubic meters per second. And with all three of those events happening within those 3 years, there was not a drop of water that entered any portion of the land that is now called Creekside. Now, if the floodplain study that was created was accurate, that would not be the case. Some of you may remember Dennis Westhoff, who was my hydraulics engineer and did the overland drainage study, also did the river engineering, and has done a lot of other work on the river, that the creek, that would be beneficial if and when a study is done and would reduce the cost. But when he came and walked the entire site in order to do the environmental study for overland drainage, Dennis concluded, and I agreed with him, that there was no evidence, nor was there any rationale for most of the lines that are formed by the floodplain study of '92. Now, having said all of that, the town of Cardston and Gordon Atkins and Creekside are bound by that 1992 study. And that's what's on your planning document, and that's the document that will affect each and every purchaser. Now, the reality here is that the province came out and made a lot of statements after that 2013 flood, and they did indicate that they were going to redo the floodplain studies and that they were going to use consistent criteria. I've made a call to the government, and they indicated that they have 5 floodplain studies underway. Obviously, we're not one of them, but it seems to me that the council, I'm hoping, would be very forceful in finding ways to insist to have a floodplain study for this town. I think that it is critically important in the management of the creek for the town, both now and as future events come about. And there's an awful lot of information, as we all know, with respect to the flood. And I guess the one other thing that, while I'm on that topic and then I'll quit, I still would like to recommend to this council, and perhaps it's something that carries over to the new council, but there really should be a committee, or at least a head person within the administration of the town of Cardston, whose responsibility it is to assist in the management of the creek, which means that that person would have to become conversant with the regulations of environment. I know that the town and others, and you know from my experience why they should be afraid of environment, because they take it upon themselves to attempt to rule our lives without giving benefit to the people who are being affected by those things. So there's quite a few things that a management committee can do in properly managing the creek during the event and during the year, and in prevention, so that what funds are available, that there can be some future preventative measures as well, along with this new floodplain study, if the province concur with your application.
Mr. Atkins, if I can ask, back in 07, 010, when I was on council, you were just...
I need to move up a little bit. If you remember, I've got my doing.
Okay. Back in 07, 010, when I was on previous council, I believe you did your own flood plan, did you not? Have your people come in and do that? Or was that just a land water management?
What was done at that time was that we took the existing documents, including the floodplain study, the flows, and also had the entire site surveyed to check elevations against the floodplain study. And as a result of that, we created a plan that showed edge of bank, high water marks and that sort of thing, and vulnerable areas. But we did not do a floodplain study.
Now that was also determining on the mitigation of the creek banks.
That was after the fact, and that's another part of the discussion. In fact, I guess once we finish this, I can get into that on the DRP portion. So.
That question is for administration, if you don't mind. Jeff, it seems to me that when there were the floods in 2013 or 2014, I don't remember exactly at which point, but I had the feeling that we had written to have those floodplain maps redrawn.
We did.
And I would like to know maybe what was the response in those days. If I remember right, it's exactly what you mentioned, that we were not quite on the radar as to that study, but I'm sure we wrote a letter. Because I remember that's something that I had requested, and
I remember the response.
do you remember that?
Yeah, the
And
response
the
we got
response
back
was,
was,
we were not,
we're at the bottom of the list of
we were
priorities.
not in a queue
right.
right at
Yeah.
that time.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. But there's nothing that says that we should not try again.
That might be a good.
We can always try again as a follow-up to that first letter.
Well, yeah, and if I may, I was in that Lethbridge meeting that we went to where we discussed the flood.
Yeah, we went there
Yeah.
too.
And basically, the reasons they posed for why Cardston was a little lower on that radar is they said there are municipalities throughout the province, including
have
counties, that had
no
no
mapping
flood mapping
at all.
at all. So they had never had it done. So they said, surely those people will be ahead of you, because you've got something that we've done. And then they said, and then, when we look at, hey, who are we going to redo, they'll go back to the ones who had the oldest studies. So the
Yeah.
ones done in the 70s and 80s are going to beat us with our 1992 study. So when we
Yeah.
realized that, it kind of was a little bit grim. But at the same time, we've had an event. We've had quite a bit of money spent here. It might be worth another letter. But just knowing that there are reasons why we weren't at the top of the list, and those were some of them, right? In fact, the Cardston County who attended with us, they said there's several miles of county creek that don't have any mapping at all. So anyway, that was...
Well,
Yeah.
I guess through the chair, the one comment I'd make is that obviously each of the different districts that have water issues, we'll just call them that, and there are some districts that have different water issues because of the lay of the town. For example, Canmore got $25 million just to change the riprap running through the town. Now, Cardston has 4 bridges, and the water runs right through the town in all of the critical areas. Calgary as well, the whole downtown is in the floodplain area. Again, we're talking political clout. And it seems to me that, again, I guess I'm really just pleading for you to use every bit of strength that you have through every resource, because otherwise you will stay at the bottom of the list. And I think that the critical thing here is that not only by not having a proper floodplain study, it does affect development in the town, but more particularly it affects what's already existing. And you can't plan for prevention, and you can't do the things that are required if you can't rely on the floodplain study you have.
Those are good points, thank you.
I think you'll find broad agreement here.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, those were the issues that we had mentioned, that it's very difficult to allow for permits to be given when we do not know if it's critical or not. And it's a problem.
Well, as I said, in my case in particular, there are some sites where the floodplain study would show a portion of the site within the floodway, and yet we've had 3 severe 100-year events without a drop of water even being close to that. So those people who build on those sites will have to locate their homes accordingly and, in effect, only use a very small portion of their site because of an incorrect document.
Right. Well, one last thing that came up in that meeting, I recall, is a couple of municipalities were asking, is there an entity that we can fundraise and pay to have them come, privately and do it? Instead of waiting on a list, can we just come up with the funding and pay to have that study done? And they said as of that time, there wasn't an avenue, but it wasn't out of the question. So now, and it's been a couple of years since that discussion, so I wonder if maybe there isn't a private organization offering that at a rate that maybe we could find some funding for, I don't know.
Well, the one thing I mentioned as well, and obviously it's both up to you and the government, but a person in this particular case who has gathered much of the information because of his requirement in my situation, which is down at Westhoff. And he is doing other floodplain studies for the province. But typically, as you know, they have a competition. And having said that, in a case like this where a person has already got a lot of evidence and a lot of background, the other thing I suppose is important is for, as a council, for you to understand from them when they refuse or put you on the bottom of the list, what are we talking about cost-wise? Because when the original study was done, in those days, in '92, a study like that could be done for, say, $30,000. Now they're saying it's, $750,000, and you can see if they had 20 or 30 of those, why you'd be at the bottom of the list. But I think we need to know what the reality is of those cost numbers so that how it applies to this amount of, because the length of the creek is not great, and so anyway, it's
good. Well, do you want to move on to the DRP stuff?
okay. In case you're asking more questions, I've just got to move up. I'm sorry. At church, I told them the other day that they'd all forgotten what the high priest salute was. Let me. We're both aware that after the 2010, 2013, 2014 events, that the province issued a request through DRP for those who were harmed by that incident. I know that you've got a lot of background, so I try to consolidate my thinking here, but the reality here, and I hope you're not offended by this because it was another administration and another management group that were responsible. But I can say to you, as I've just a moment ago, in terms of creek management, the town has been woeful in their management of water. I've noticed that over those 3 years, the accumulation of debris at the 3 bridges still hasn't been removed, and yet the erosive action and the changes of that debris and as it gets lodged in there. In my particular case, I bought the property in 2009, 2010, very next year, first event, and as some of you are aware, the existing riprap that is by the golf course bridge was placed in there by the province and the town of Cardston many years ago. Now there are 3 things that have serious effect here. Number 1, I'm not sure how environment, the town, and the government did such a bad job, because everything from the bridge north, almost 200 to 250 feet, and about 600 feet in length, was landfill. It was filled with about 400 truckloads of material that should never have gone in there. Now, having said that, it was all safe and secure, and over quite a number of years, no problems. But in 2010, the beginning of the 2010 event, 3 60-foot conifers came down the creek, got lodged in the 2/3 point of the bridge, the pontoon, and it doesn't have any kind of deflector on it, which is another fault. But anyway, it got lodged there, and they moved in this direction. The channel used to come right through under the bridge and was on the south side. When those 3 trees got lodged in there, that's when a water management committee would have likely been dispatched with long arm chainsaws and could do it all under the rules of environment and everything else, but nobody did it. As a matter of fact, we, even though we had taken possession of the land, we mentioned it to the then management of the golf course, and eventually we actually ended up being the ones to remove that material. But when those 3 trees were in there, it changed the erosive action so dramatically that it actually moved the channel from the south side to the north side. And once it had stripped off that old concrete sidewalk riprap, it then started to work on the landfill. And the landfill had no cohesion. It was just like talcum powder, really. Anyway, it was taking away sections 10 and 12 feet at a time. Between that event and the 2013 event, those 3 trees caused us to lose 30,000 cubic meters of soil. Now, some of that soil that was lost was ER, MR, and Gordon Atkins. In any case, the road was affected. There were about 20 or 30 80-year-old trees that were taken out, along with the willows and so on. Anyway, that's the cause of the beginning of this thing. Now, I made a grave error, because at that particular time, we all knew that the town's riverbank was also affected, and that we needed to work in concert to get this repaired. I didn't trust you. I didn't believe that the town had the stuff to do what was necessary, and I had to do it because at that point my entire development, my whole project was lost without the mitigation. So I went ahead and did it on my own, trying to consult with the town. Obviously the town was behind, but that's when the whole process started to come unglued in my mind. I think you understand that the disaster recovery program is supposed to replace what is lost. It's not supposed to enhance. It's not supposed to prevent. I can be critical of all that, but that's the rationale. Well, anyway, we went ahead with that, and in good faith, did all of the work. I redirected almost $700,000 of my development funds to do the mitigation that was necessary along that edge. I won't even get into the encounter that you were aware of in the press of theoretically me offending the environment. It was really a personality of a guy that came on site and tried to tell me what I could do on my own property, and my response was probably not the one that I should have used. Anyway, he became more of an enemy than a friend, and so he pushed the penalty. I won't go into all the details. You'd love the details, but I won't go into the details. But after the appeal board hearing, they really seriously chastised the Department of Environment for all the actions that they took in that matter. They reduced the penalty in half, which is the maximum they could. But notwithstanding all that, the reality is that the environment, who changed their name and changed their location, who changed their mission 3 times in 2 years, and in that time period with me working on the mitigation, I dealt with 31 different individuals, each of whom had told me that they were the authority. In any case, try to forget all of that. When it came down to the final crunch, I was then under the appeal, just as you were. I sent in the documents, all the invoices and all of the backup information of the work that we had done. And unfortunately for me, as you know, that time was just about exactly when the fire happened in the north. So their bodies were stretched, and I ended up with a young fellow that was part-time, and then he quit, and I got another fellow, and then he came back. And in the process, to date, I've now worked through the 8th evaluator under DRP. But the bottom line of all that is, after he went through all the documentation and all the work that we had done, and we did it all to proper engineering standards, the interpretation, first of all, he was constrained by a protocol under DRP that claimed that they would only pay for riprap replacement. Now, Nolan Card claims, and we haven't been able to find the evidence, but he claims that when that was redone and the dredging was redone, that between the province and the town, that the riprap went the full distance. We don't have photographic evidence of that. In any case, this young man took it upon himself to decide that there was 250 feet of the 650 feet of riprap that we replaced. The town, as you know, only replaced about 100 feet of riprap on the west side of the bridge. Now, we won't get into that for a second, but the reality is that what he did was, first of all, say, okay, you can only get paid back for replacing riprap. You can't replace it with concrete riprap because it's no longer permissible. And so he took the small area of the big area, and then he took all of the invoices and took the proportion of that, which he had calculated at 250 feet, and divided that into the total, and sent me a check for $119,000 and said, sayonara. The reality is that even without the plea that I'm coming to council with today, there was a mathematical error made there, because the work, and I'm not sure that you'll be privy to all of this, but let's just say that the work that I did close to the golf course bridge, which is the primary area that had the riprap on it, that work required all the river engineering. It required the biologist 24/7 on site. It required the damming, the fish harvest. It required all of the material that was the landfill to be removed, all of the concrete in the creek and along the creek to be removed and taken off site. New clay coming back and being packed to 98% proctor density for the entire length of that. So the cost of that, my 600 feet, his 200 feet, was about $490,000. And the other two portions, both the province and fisheries, allowed us to go in because it was simply all drainage rock. So they allowed us to come in and just back slope the existing rock without putting a filter on it or anything, and then putting the riprap back on it. So it cost about $50,000 to $80,000 to do more than half, almost 3/4 the work, and the other portion was the big number. So notwithstanding all of that, my major complaint and my major whine was simply that the town of Cardston was treated differently than I was. You had a process that you may recall that however and whoever you worked with within the same departments, you got an advance on your funds. You got an approval on the cost of construction before there was even documents put out, in other words, the estimate. And then when you documented the cost, the low bidder, who all the other contractors were sure was going to lose his shirt, in any case, the funding that you got and received, you were able to pay off that contractor for the work you did. And at the same time, in all the work that you did, there was only less than 100 feet of actual riprap that you replaced. All the rest of the work was, we'll call it enhancement, because it was lost area, but by their definition, enhancement. So again, I was complaining that we were treated differently. And I can understand that too. I mean, you're a municipality, I'm a corporate individual. The program should not discriminate. If you've read the letter that was sent back now after all of this, have you had a chance to read that, or would it be appropriate for me to read that quick letter?
Gordon, I didn't give them that because it contained all those breakdown of all of those expenses and things, so I just kept that one out.
Okay.
So if you want to read the excerpts, that might be appropriate.
Once we get it, it's public.
Are you okay with me reading it?
Yep.
Okay. Well, basically, this is the one that came from the Alberta government, and it's under the signature of Shane Schreiber, the Managing Director of Alberta Emergency Management Agency. So all of the preliminary stuff, your application for review has been considered by the appeals branch of the Disaster Recovery Program, DRP, and we would like to address your remaining concerns. In your application for review, you indicated the following items for review. Inconsistency in the financial assistance provided to municipalities versus private sector applicants. The method used to determine the amount of DRP funding that was awarded to you in the amount of $119,000. The actual measurement regulated replaced requirement and the removal of riprap was not recognized. Survey costs, and these other three items, survey costs, rock and placement of willows, are things that still have not been done. So they're part of the requirement of fisheries environment to the tune of about $80,000. So the total, as I said, is in that $600 to $700 range. We have considered the reasons set out in your application, and we do understand and emphasize with the situation in which you find yourself. The program assists in restoring the basic living essentials for people impacted by a disaster. During this review, you have expressed concerns regarding damages sustained to your land caused by the pedestrian bridge located on adjacent land owned by the town of Cardston. In our consultation with the DRP Municipal Unit, a recommendation resulted that you pursue this issue with the town of Cardston, who can subsequently discuss eligible costs for reimbursement with their DRP Municipal Unit case manager. I'd like to thank you for your patience during the review each application's individual, on and on and on. Now, I guess the point is, as I said, first of all, I need to apologize for not trusting you, because I honestly didn't think that the town would step up to the plate with such a big item. Now, I know that the funding that came to you from them, and it came more freely than it did to me, but because we really should have done it together. And so when I had the conversation with the 8th evaluator, who was very empathetic, she said at the time, she said all of this should have been done under the guise of the town of Cardston and distributed accordingly. Now, I guess my quest to you is they've advised me to work with the town in order to become reimbursed. Now, obviously, all of you as council members would have to have in the back of your mind, oh, that's all fine and dandy, as long as it doesn't cost the town of Cardston anything. And I don't think that it will. I don't think that there's a downside in this. I've had that discussion with Jeff. And did he call you, Jeff? Okay. And I don't know what you'll want to say about that, but they did say that they would call. And I think that what they're prepared to do is to have us analyze those areas and those accessible programs that can flow through the town of Cardston. And I think really that what they've done is they found two things. One was they made a mistake in the math and the way it was done. And number two, even though they've said we only replace riprap, their program is very definite in saying we replace what is lost. Now my question to them was immediate, and that was, okay, if you're not going to do anything but replace the riprap, what about the 30,000 cubic meters? Because once the riprap is gone, then the water bounce caused the town of Cardston's problem and also the rest of my problem. So it was the result of the erosive effect at the bridge that started the process going. In any case, I'm hoping that that this council is able to direct this administration to effectively have us coordinate between the town, ourselves, and the province to see if there can't be some appropriate recovery here without any damage or harm to the town. The one other aspect of that, and I want to tread carefully here because I'm not trying to lay blame. These events are the result of both the way the government operates and the way we react to the way government operates. But in addition to that, you may be aware that the other rationale for having done it through the town of Cardston was that almost entirely the land that was lost, or the land that was lost first, was ER, and MR land comes under the jurisdiction of the town. And so it would have been a simple thing had I trusted you to come to you and say, look, let's do this together, and so on. Now, the other aspect that you should know in my particular case, and it's not one that I can recover, but you're well aware of your own engineer with respect to the work that was done on your recovery and mitigation. I've spent almost 2 years. And then with respect just to the penalty, I think that the provincial government spent about $130,000 trying to impact a penalty on me of $5,000. If you could have seen the presentation that they had in the appeal board, and in addition to that, when I came in, I had to smile, honestly. They had 1,800 pages of correspondence with me, and my complaint was, look, you've been in this position now for 16 years. Who would you go to as a single source to make sure that I, as a neophyte, would go through this process without offending the Act? And he said I couldn't comment on that. Anyway, the 1,600 pages told it all. I mean, it was so heavy in terms of the regulatory process, when in fact all we were trying to do is the right thing. When they came on site to enact the penalty, they actually inspected the work we did. They didn't change a single thing, and they said, we would have approved everything you've done. We're just saying you don't have the paperwork. A proper person would have said, we don't have the paperwork, let's shut this down for 2 or 3 days, get the paperwork and get it done. But no, it was a real process after that. So anyway, I'm hoping that you'll see your way clear to instruct staff to work so that we can do what's necessary here and with new council to complete it. And as I said, obviously the real criteria here is that I can point fingers at golf course management or the town or myself when that event happened. The reality is that it happened, but I'm not trying to deflect any costs onto the town. I'm not saying that it's the town's fault. It's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying we're the result of this. We've done the best we can to do the repair. I think it's been a real enhancement both to the golf course, to the fish habitat, and to the way in which this development and your golf course will react. The one minor thing I will mention, though, because it's a critical one, Jeff will remember that during the 213 event, I called for an emergency order to be able to do something to prevent damage. Jeff and I stood on that golf course bridge, and the golf course bridge, if we call it this, and the pylon here, this side of the bridge has a very major tree, and that tree is the only stabilization for that bridge. Now, if the event had been 6 hours longer, the bridge would have gone, and the golf course, that whole 9 holes, would have been shut down for a very long period of time. Anyway, 6 hours, it didn't last that other 6 hours, so they retracted the emergency work, and we got away with it. But it's that close, and it's still a problem that is there, and the mitigation we've done may or may not correct that problem. So, thank you.
Do we have any questions? Anyone here, Councillor?
Mr. Atkins, as I sit on council before and now, I look at your development down there, I look at the mitigation that's been done on the creek side. There's a concern that what we do upside is going to create problems downside. Could we use that type of, with your engineering knowledge, could we use that kind of a discussion on getting more mitigation along our creek bank and utilizing a flood plan?
I guess my answer to that would be, obviously the first thing that would be most critical would be to have the floodplain study. because that would determine the vulnerable points. You need to understand that both your engineer, Albert, and my engineer, Dennis Westhoff, are under an obligation in their river study to ensure that the recommendations that they make for mitigation does not cause downstream damage. Having said that, you may know that even your own mitigation, you were able to, again, through approvals that were, I'm saying unfair, but you have what is called a groin in the form of the reverse tree stump. And you've got it in all of the mitigated areas. We were very insistent. First of all, we were going to put in temporary groins, which would have changed the channel and kept from having all the damage we had. They wouldn't allow us to put in the temporary groins, even though they were the modular Lego blocks that could be put in the creek with a crane without doing anything more than displacing 4 feet of water. They were concerned that maybe they would wash away and they wouldn't have any way to come after me. I said, look, all you have to do is put a bond in. If they go away, I have to chase them. But no, they didn't do that. And then we placed the groins from an engineering perspective. And when we got to the point of approval, after that year and a half of all the approvals, and we finally got there, they said, oh, but wait, your groins will have to go through one further check with the natives. In other words, it has to be circulated and approved by the native population. And we said, forget it. We've got to do this. We can't wait another year. We can't go through another event. And so we didn't get to put our groins in. You did. So the only concern that I have with the work that has been done is the way in which the groins work against and for each other. And that's something that I really need to have my own engineer take a look at to see what, because as you know, we've now had 2 years with no event. And but I think once that first event comes, we'll learn quite a bit from that as well, and there'll probably still be a couple of surprises, but I think we've done a good job between ourselves and the town.
Any other questions? No, all right, there's one last item on the agenda dealing with Mr. Atkins, and that is a in-camera item. At this point, we would probably entertain a motion to adjourn to in-camera while he's here. We estimate that'll take maybe, what do you think, 10 minutes or less, Gordon, would you say? Better? Yeah, less than 10 minutes, maybe closer to 5. And so we'll go in camera, come back out, and then continue the meeting. So is there someone that would make that motion? Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, that was the motion? All right, to go in camera, and all those in favor? Thank you. We'll ask our gallery and our media